what I've done for years, it's funny. I actually, maybe at some time I'll put this online. I've taken careful notes. I have a folder right next to me here where I essentially have my nutrition is been very consistent for 10 or 15 years.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask about your personal diet before we finish the conversation, though, because I think a lot of people, they hold you in high regard for like optimal practices and kind of like what you deem to be the best modalities of improving like mental clarity, sharpness through like actual lifestyle modifications, dietary manipulation, sleep hygiene, etc. So like through your trials and tribulations of experimenting with different things, some people, they use keto to like stay mentally sharp. Maybe it's not sustainable long term. They intertwine like cyclical carbohydrate cycling or whatever. A lot of people intermittent fast. Like for me personally, I find if I eat a carbohydrate dense meal right when I wake up, personally, my mental clarity suffers a decent amount. Like, is there something you've nailed down as like your ideal kind of like routine? And like, what do those foods generally consist of? And this is probably like, maybe this is way too many questions for one big statement, but hopefully it's not. Have you done anything to assess, like, do you hold any weight in those kind of like tests that assess your allergy response to food groups to assess if they're going to be good on your mental state? Or do you do just like biofeedback through trial and error sort of thing?
Yeah, trial and error. I'm not a big believer in gut microbiome testing for myself. So I think I found a diet that works well for me. Obviously, it will be different for different people, but this is what allows me to be consistent about eating quality foods. One thing I'll note before I say this, one very dramatic effect of taking this, what I would say is a pretty low dose of TRT since the new year, is absolutely zero appetite for sugar or for any foods that you would consider junk or processed foods.
Lucky.
Almost negative appetite, but I've always enjoyed fatty foods as an indulgence more than sugary. But so over the years, I've tried many different nutritional plans and been very regimented about them and took notes. I'll just give you a kind of a highlight of a few, and then why I didn't stick with them, and then emphasize what I'm doing now. So when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I did try a kind of a high fat, very low carbohydrate thing. I was like drinking half and half and eating meat, and I did grow quite a lot on that. But it was, of course, I was 19 years old. I was also training heavy. I was completely natural, but I was also probably in the peak. I'm guessing my androgen levels were probably taken off. And I am somewhat of a fast responder in terms of when I weight train, I grow quickly. Also, when I stop weight training or I run, I shrink quickly. So, it cuts both ways. I did a few years ago, I tried keto, including taking liquid ketone esters. And I got psoriasis on my scalp that was unbelievable. It was like my scalp sloughing off. It was terrible. I stopped the ketone esters. I put carbohydrates back in my diet, and it went away within a week. So who knows? I was told I did it wrong, and I probably did it wrong, but it shouldn't be that complicated. It's my
yeah. Was it just like the same foods you would normally eat, but like you pull the carbohydrates and then increase the quantities of the other stuff that you were already tolerating normally?
Yeah, a little more fat, and the only thing I added were those ketone esters, which were interesting in their own right. But so what I've done for years, it's funny. I actually, maybe at some time I'll put this online. I've taken careful notes. I have a folder right next to me here where I essentially have my nutrition is been very consistent for 10 or 15 years. And I should just say, I'm not particularly lean, nor am I carrying a lot of excess body fat. I think I'm pretty average in that sense. I don't know, somewhere around 12% or something. I haven't measured in a long time. But basically for the last 10 years, I've fasted anywhere from 12 to 16 hours for every 24-hour cycle. So I knew Sachin when he was formulating intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, and his book and his science was coming out. I also got to know Ori Hofmeckler, who wrote the book, The Warrior Diet. He's kind of the originator of the 1 meal a day system. Ori was in Israeli Special Forces, really nice guy. He's in his probably early 60s now. He still maintains 5% body fat. He's very fit, very, very nice guy, actually. He doesn't get enough credit for being the kind of modern founder of intermittent fasting, because it's been existed for centuries, of course. But so basically, I get up, I hydrate, I drink some caffeine. I do delay my caffeine by about 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking, because it does seem to avoid a crash later. Coffee, yerba mate, that kind of thing. But then I do drink Athletic Greens, even though they are a podcast sponsor. I do love Athletic Greens. I've been drinking that stuff for ages, gosh, since 2012. And I do love it. Then my first meal is almost always a low carb meal. It's some steak or ground beef, some Brazil nuts, maybe a vegetable, but I do have more mental clarity when I'm low carbohydrate, provided that my glycogen stores have been repacked from the previous day or so. So I'll typically train late morning. If I train really hard, if it's resistance training, then I'll have, a bowl of rice or a bowl of oatmeal or something. And I like butter, so I'll put a pat of butter in there, and my blood lipid profiles are just fine. Yeah, I think there's an entire YouTube video sort of analyzing and scrutinizing that I said that I like butter. I don't walk around putting on sticks of butter. Well, again, it's like my first impulse when I saw it was first I laughed, and then I thought, wow, do they really think that I live on that much butter? Small amounts of butter. But then what I realized, I was like, well, this is really sad. Like they don't really have anything else to talk about besides the fact that I eat butter. But in any case, so a low carbohydrate meal in the midday for me is best, because then I don't get that dip, that crash. A mental clarity comes easy.
So you would be sleeping for 8 hours until roughly 5:30 to 6 a.m., right? And then you wouldn't eat for another 6 to 8 hours, and then you'd start eating.
So about 6 hours. Yeah. Okay. But if I get up and I do put a little salt in my water, because sometimes the appetite can be, sometimes you think you're hungry, but if you put some salt and lemon juice in water, you drink that, then you notice, I'm not hungry anymore. And you were probably sodium deficient. Okay. A lot of people who do low carb diets are sodium deficient. So I sort of fast until about noon. Then I eat a low carb meal. I make sure it's not a huge meal, but I go by appetite. Sometimes that's 2 hamburger patties and some, maybe I'll eat a cucumber, or sometimes I'll have a bowl of oatmeal, but rarely, right? I'm not super strict about that. If I've trained, I will include carbohydrates and some fruit with that meal too. And then in the afternoon, I tend to just hydrate. I might have some almonds, Athletic Greens, maybe. Sometimes I'll have some whey protein or something of that sort. And then for dinner, for years now, I've really emphasized starches. I'll have pasta, salad, sometimes a little bit of fish, like tuna fish or salmon, but mostly carbohydrates. And then I sleep like a baby, and I go to sleep sometime around 10:30, 11, and I sleep great. And when I've cut the carbohydrates out, 2 things happen. One, I wake up and if I feel like I can train, my endurance, even within weight training, is not that strong. And then I'm hungrier much earlier. The other is, if I eat too much meat close to bedtime, I don't sleep that well. And probably because the gastric clearance time is too long. I do try and take a walk before or after dinner. Today I did it before. So there are evenings where I'm eating these, a bowl of pasta or a bunch of rice and salad. And I think to myself, just because the mindset is, I need protein. And sometimes I'll have some, but I'm eating sometimes a ribeye for lunch and scoops of protein powder. Now I will say, if I'm training, like the other day I trained hard. I'm using your EAAs now, which I like very much. Awesome. And your post-workout. And no, folks, I did not get paid to say that. I purchased these supplements. So so I do take that afterwards, and again, fruit and starch. So for me, it's really fast, train toward the end of that fast, eat. If I've trained, eat some carbohydrates and some clean protein. And then towards the afternoon, I might have a little something else in the afternoon that is also kind of low carb-ish. And then in the evening, I eat my carbohydrates in it. They're not huge bowls of pasta, and I wake up feeling really good. I think my glycogen's restored and I'm ready to go. Occasionally, if I'm not training much, I'll drop the carbohydrate meal to about half the size, but I don't weigh my food. I don't do any of that. And yeah, for me, this has worked for a very long period of time. And yes, there are days where I get up and have 4 eggs for breakfast at 8 a.m. Yeah, it happens. So if you ever see me eating 4 eggs for breakfast at 8 a.m. at a cafe, whoever you are, don't cry foul. I do this from time to time. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And then it's the typical stuff. It's like tomatoes, avocados, broccoli, spinach, olive oils, fish oil. I'm big on fish oil for all the health benefits. And I've been doing this for 30 plus years, pretty much.
How many grams of fish oil do you have per day?
So I am a big believer, based on really good data, that peer-reviewed data, that you want to get 2 grams of EPA in your system every day for the antidepressant effects, the blood lipid profile effects, it seems to me that it's obvious that sufficiently high EPAs are just good for us.
Yeah.
And that not having sufficiently high EPAs is bad for us. And so, since I don't eat a lot of fatty fish, because I'm not terribly fond of the taste of fish anyway, especially on the West Coast, I think on the East Coast and in Canada, I think you get better seafood. But here, I don't know, on the West Coast, it's like the salmon, it isn't always that great. So I think fish oil is terrific. Yeah.
All right. So that to get that 2 gram EPA yield, how much actual fish oil are you having though? Is it like 4 or 5 grams or something, or?
Yeah, so it's a couple capsules of the Thorne Super EPA, and usually I also, this might make some people cringe, but I actually will put a tablespoon of the Carlson's fish oil, the lemon flavored fish oil, on my oatmeal with salt, and to me it tastes delicious. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that sounds decent.
Yeah, and just for skin health and quality, and just for mental health and feelings of well-being. I get the probiotics from the Athletic Greens. I used to supplement with capsule probiotics. 2 reasons why I don't do that anymore. One, even though I can afford them, that they are sort of ridiculously expensive for what they are. That's one. More importantly, my colleague Justin Sonnenberg and his wife Erica Sonnenberg, in the right upstairs from me at Stanford, have published data showing that 2 to 4 servings of fermented foods each day, low sugar fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, natto, things of that sort, greatly decrease the number of inflammatory markers in the so-called inflammatome, which is the kind of the genome, but the inflammatory markers, IL-6 and other things of that sort, TNF alpha. And it's not clear also that the over-the-counter antibiotic capsules don't seem to replace the correct gut microbiome elements. And there is some reports of them creating brain fog and making people feel kind of foggy when you have too much activity of microbiota in your gut. So, that's why
it seems like a lot of them are just like randomly selected strains with no real like clinical like reinforcing literature at all.
Yeah, and lactobacillus. So that there are a few that and I'm probably getting some of these names wrong, so maybe let me retract that statement about lactobacilli. You can keep it in here, but I have a podcast coming up that looks at time-restricted feeding, and it turns out that some probiotics can create some mental effects that aren't great. Other gut microbiota are really terrific, and so the ones that come in capsule form, I think, just hit it with it's like a shotgun approach. Whereas fermented foods, especially fermented foods that are slightly acidic, so things like fresh sauerkraut, natto, fresh pickles, this kind of thing. I mean, pickles can't really be fresh. It's kind of an oxymoron, but you know what I mean. Not jars of pickles that have been sitting around non-refrigerated for very long periods of time, but the ones that require refrigeration, they maintain a lot of elements that can contribute to a healthy gut microbiome. And the work coming out of Duke University, a nutritionist and neuroscientist, Diego Borges, keep an eye out for his work. We should kick back and forth some of his papers, Derek, because he's doing amazing work showing how there are neurons in the gut that trigger dopamine release in the brain, and that set up a whole situation in your body of rapid healing. And this is what I think the origins of GPC 157 are, which is that gastric peptides if they're provided, the gastric juices are of the right chemistry, can actually facilitate healing all over the body. So sort of a tangential statement, but it relates.
Okay. Speaking of Thorne, do you use their Elite multivitamin by chance, or what do you feel like about multivitamins in general?
Yeah, here I don't use their multivitamin. I use their
do you have
fish
like
oil.
a stance on like multivitamins in general?
Yeah, so I do take one each day, and the one I take, this is really funny. This just goes to show you that we develop these habits, and they're hard to change over time. So many years ago, I bought a canister of the Optimen.
Okay.
And I've been taking that vitamin for something like 25 years. I just take one with the one full meal I have each day. And I don't, to be honest, at this point, it's like, it's rational only in the sense that it's never causing me a problem. But I do notice if I take B vitamins, and it's rich in B vitamins, that you metabolize your food more quickly. This is clear to me.
Okay. Yeah, I use the Thorne multivitamin, like Elite, but I'm always interested to hear individuals' opinions on if multivitamins are potentially counterproductive or not, because some people have differing stances on that.
Yeah, I don't, because I get my blood work done, I'm not too worried about buildup of fat soluble vitamins and things. I take a little bit of vitamin E from time to time. I do take boron. That came up earlier. I do take I think it's I have to look on my chart.
3 milligrams.
I think it's 2 to 4 is what I wrote down. Yeah.
Okay.
2 to 4. And I'm happy to send over my list. Although basically everything we talked about here, it's covered. I mean, I take some K2 on your recommendation, and I noticed that my cardiac markers got better. So
cool.
Thank you. I take some garlic extract. I sometimes take some CLA. Sometimes take some green tea extract, but I think those are not absolute. But the K2 was a very good recommendation, because my blood lipid profiles are really good, but they weren't quite exactly where I wanted them to. Put the K2 in, and everything just kind of locked into place. So thank you.
What happened to your HDL after introducing TRT? Because from what I've seen, the main significant aberrations in biomarkers after the deployment of exogenous tests in general is like, it's not that deleterious especially at TRT dosages. You're not going to have some crazy, like maybe some outliers are going to have potential viscosity issues in their hematology that they need to address through lifestyle changes or whatever. But in general, the thing I see most problematic or difficult to deal with is HDL suppression. And I guess sometimes SHBG suppression can be an issue for some people, where they get into but usually those individuals are using too high of a dose and infrequent of a dosing schedule. But the HDL, just interested if you notice any differences.